October 12, 1919, Waco, Texas. Henrietta Miller had been certain she was carrying a girl, so certain that when the midwife delivered the baby and announced, "It's a boy," there was a moment of confusion about what to name this third son they had chosen. Doris had been meant for a daughter, but it was the name they had, so Doris it would be. The boy would carry it with the quiet dignity his parents instilled in all their children, even as schoolyard bullies and strangers made sport of it. Connery and Henrietta Miller ran a small farm outside Waco, working land that gave grudgingly under the Texas sun. They had 4 sons in total. Each one learned early that survival meant work, endless, back-breaking work. Doris helped cook meals for the family, did laundry, tended animals, worked the fields, until his hands were calloused and his back ached. There was no time for self-pity, no room for complaint. You did what needed doing because that's what it meant to be a Miller. Waco in the 1920s and 1930s was not an easy place to grow up black. Texas had its own brand of racial segregation, its own unwritten rules about what a black boy could aspire to and where he could go. The schools for black children received whatever resources white schools didn't want. The jobs available to black men were limited to manual labor, service positions, that work that kept you in your place and made sure you remembered it. But Doris had something that couldn't be taught and couldn't be taken away. Physical power coupled with an unshakable work ethic. Moore High School, he played fullback on the football team, where his size and strength made him a force opponents feared. He wasn't just big, he was quick, aggressive, kind of player who ran through defenders rather than around them. He also learned to box. There was a purity to it that appealed to him. 2 men in a ring, skill and heart determining the outcome. No excuses, no complaints. He was good at it. Very good. The kind of good that made men twice his age take notice and step back when he entered a room. But football and boxing couldn't pay the bills. The farm was struggling. The Depression had hit rural Texas hard, and the Miller family, like thousands of others, was barely holding on. Doris started the 8th grade in January 1937 at age 17, already older than his classmates because poverty had delayed his education. He repeated 8th grade the following year, struggling with coursework while his mind was elsewhere, worrying about his family, about money, about a future that seemed to offer nothing but more hard labor for meager pay. In September 1939, age 19, Doris Miller made a decision that would change his life and, eventually, change history. He walked into a Navy recruiting office in Dallas and enlisted. The recruiter looked him up and down, saw the powerful build, the steady eyes, the kind of man who could handle hard work and harder discipline. But the recruiter also saw his skin color, and that meant the options were limited. Limited. "You'll be a mess attendant," the recruiter said. Not a question, not an offer, a statement of fact. In 1939, the United States Navy was thoroughly segregated. Black sailors could not serve in combat roles. They could not operate weapons systems. They could not command other sailors. They could not, in the Navy's institutional judgment, be trusted with the responsibilities that came with defending the nation. They could cook. They could clean. They could serve food to white officers and shine their shoes and make their beds. They could be, in essence, servants in uniform. Doris Miller took the position because it was the only position available and because it offered something his life in Waco could not. Steady paycheck he could send home to his parents, a chance to see the world, an escape from the suffocating limitations of Depression-era Texas. On September 16, 1939, he officially became mess attendant, 3rd class, Doris Miller, United States Navy. He was assigned to the Naval Training Station in Norfolk, Virginia, where he learned the duties expected of him: how to properly set a table, how to address officers, how to maintain the immaculate cleanliness the Navy demanded, how to be invisible while being indispensable. He learned his place, to accept it, at least outwardly. What he thought privately about, a nation that would take his labor and his loyalty but daren't deny him the chance to fight for that nation, history does not record. Like most men of his generation and his circumstances, he kept such thoughts to himself and did his job. After Norfolk, Miller was assigned to the ammunition ship USS Pyro, where he served as a mess attendant, serving meals and cleaning quarters. It was monotonous work, but it was honest work, and the money he earned went back to WWII, helping his family survive. On January 2, 1940, Miller received new orders transfer to the battleship USS West Virginia, one of the Navy's most powerful warships, recently assigned to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, as part of the Pacific Fleet. The USS West Virginia was a Colorado-class battleship, a floating fortress of steel and firepower, 6 and 24 feet long, displacing 600 tons, armed with 8 16-inch guns capable of hurling 2 700-pound shells over 21 miles. She carried a crew of approximately 2,000 men, and among them, Doris Miller was one of the few black sailors assigned to the ship's mess halls, serving food, cleaning dishes, invisible to most of the crew except when they needed something. But Miller found one place where he was far from invisible: the boxing ring. Ships often organized boxing matches for entertainment and competition, and Miller, with his high school experience and natural power, quickly made a name for himself. After fight, he dominated opponents, his fists delivering knockout punches that echoed through the ship's recreation spaces. He became the USS West Virginia's heavyweight boxing champion, a title that earned him respect from crew members who might otherwise have dismissed him as just another mess attendant. In July 1940, Miller received temporary duty aboard the USS Nevada for secondary battery gunnery school. This was not combat training. The Navy still wouldn't trust him with that. But it was exposure to weapons systems, to the mechanics of anti-aircraft defenses, procedures and protocols of gunnery operations. He watched. He listened. He learned. He returned to the West Virginia on August 3, 1940, was promoted to mess attendant second class on February 16, 1941. More responsibility, better pay, the same limitations. By December 1941, Doris Miller had been serving aboard the USS West Virginia for nearly 2 years. He had settled into the rhythm of Navy life aboard a battleship. The early mornings, the endless work, monotony broken by the occasional boxing match or shore leave in Honolulu. Pearl Harbor was considered a plum assignment, a tropical paradise, where the biggest danger seemed to be sunburn and the biggest challenge was finding entertainment on liberty. The war in Europe seemed distant. Japan's aggression in China and Southeast Asia was concerning to military strategists, but hardly seemed like America's problem. Most sailors aboard the Pacific Fleet believed that if war came, they would have plenty of warning, plenty of time to prepare. They were catastrophically wrong. December 7, 1941, 7:55 a.m. Doris Miller was in the bowels of the USS West Virginia, moving through the ship's cramped passageways with the efficiency of 2 years' practice, collecting soiled laundry from the crew's quarters. It was routine work, mindless work, kind of work that let your thoughts wander to other things, to letters from home, to plans for shore leave, to the boxing match scheduled for next week. At 7:55 a.m., Japanese Nakajima B-5N, Kate, torpedo bomber, flying at 140 miles per hour just 40 feet above the waters of Pearl Harbor, released its payload, 80-40 Pound-type 91 aerial torpedo dropped into the water, propeller-driven motor engaging, fins guiding it toward its target like a mechanical shark hunting prey. Torpedo struck the USS West Virginia on her port side with a massive explosion that sent a shudder through the entire 600-ton vessel. Metal screamed. Bulkheads buckled, the lights flickered and died in sections of the ship as power systems failed. Miller felt the deck lurch beneath his feet. The laundry basket tumbled from his hands. Around him, men were shouting, confusion mixing with the first edges of panic. Then came the second torpedo, and the third, and the fourth. Within minutes, 7 torpedoes had struck the USS West Virginia. Each explosion tore massive holes in her hull, flooding compartments, killing sailors trapped below decks, turning the proud battleship into a dying titan. The general quarters alarm sounded. A harsh, insistent klaxon that sent trained men racing to their battle stations. Miller dropped everything and ran. His powerful legs, carrying him through smoke-filled passageways, past sailors who were bleeding, screaming, dying. His battle station was the anti-aircraft battery magazine, amidships, a storage area for the ammunition that fed the ship's anti-aircraft defenses. But when Miller arrived, he found it destroyed, torn apart by one of the torpedo hits. Twisted metal, water flooding in, the smell of fuel oil and explosives, the terrible certainty that men had died here, crushed or drowned in seconds. Miller stood there for perhaps 5 seconds, processing the destruction, understanding that his assigned position no longer existed. Some men might have frozen. Some might have fled. Miller turned and headed back up toward the deck, toward the sound of explosions and screaming and the chattering roar of machine guns. He emerged onto a deck transformed into hell. Smoke poured from the USS Arizona, ahead of the West Virginia. Flames shot hundreds of feet into the air. Debris rained down. Pieces of ships, pieces of men, the shrapnel of modern warfare delivered by Japanese dive bombers that screamed down from the morning sky like mechanical birds of prey. The harbor was chaos. Every battleship moored along Battleship Row was under attack. Torpedoes sliced through the water. Bombs fell with whistling screams followed by earth-shaking explosions. Anti-aircraft fire reached up toward the attacking planes, tracer rounds making glowing arcs against the sky, most of them missing, a few finding targets and sending Japanese planes spiraling into the water in plumes of fire and smoke. Oil from ruptured fuel tanks spread across the harbor surface, and then that oil caught fire, creating a nightmare scenario for sailors blown into the water or forced to abandon ship. Men swam through burning oil, their screams adding to the cacophony of apocalypse. Miller reported to Times Square, the nickname for the central meeting point where the fore, to, aft and port, to starboard passageways crossed on the West Virginia, named after New York City's famous intersection. It was here that sailors would gather when their assigned stations were destroyed or inaccessible, waiting for orders, ready to help wherever needed. Commander Dorsey Johnson, the ship's communications officer, was organizing damage control parties and casualty collection. When he saw Miller, saw his size, his strength, his composure despite the chaos, Johnson immediately put him to work helping to evacuate wounded men. Miller began carrying sailors to safety. Some could walk with assistance. Others had to be carried bodily, blood, slick and barely conscious. One man had lost his legs below the knees. Another had burns covering most of his upper body. A third had shrapnel embedded so deeply in his chest that Miller could feel the metal fragments grinding against bone as he lifted him. Through all of this, Japanese planes continued their attack. Bombers screamed down, releasing their payloads almost directly overhead. The concussions from nearby explosions knocked men off their feet. Strafing runs from Japanese Zeros sent the .50 caliber rounds tearing across the deck, ricocheting off metal, punching through flesh. Miller worked through it all. Later, survivors would describe his calm demeanor, his efficiency, the way he moved through the carnage, as if he were still going about his regular duties, rather than navigating the end of the world. Lieutenant Commander Johnson gave Miller a new order. "Come with me to the bridge. We need to move the captain." Captain Mervyn Bennion was 54 years old, veteran naval officer who had graduated third in his class from the United States Naval Academy in 1910. He had commanded the USS West Virginia since July 1941, earning the respect and loyalty of his crew through his competence, his fairness, and his genuine concern for the men under his command. At approximately 8:05 a.m., Captain Bennion stood on the bridge directing his crew's response to the attack. An armor-piercing bomb struck the nearby USS Tennessee. The explosion sent a large fragment of shrapnel, a jagged piece of steel moving at lethal velocity, through the air and into Captain Bennion's abdomen. The wound was catastrophic. The shrapnel had torn through his stomach and spine, shredding internal organs, severing blood vessels. He collapsed, unable to stand, blood pouring from the gaping wound in his midsection. When Miller and Johnson reached the bridge, they found Bennion lying on a cot behind the conning tower, still trying to command his ship despite the mortal wound and the intense fire surrounding the bridge area. He had refused to be evacuated to sick bay, refused to leave his post even as he was dying. Miller and another sailor attempted to move Bennion to a safer location, to carry him down from the exposed bridge where enemy strafing continued. But the captain's size, the confined space, obstacles created by battle damage, and Bennion's own protests made it impossible. Instead, they moved him on the cot to a slightly more protected position. Protected was a relative term on a bridge under direct enemy fire. Throughout this process, Captain Bennion continued questioning his officers about the state of the ship, continued issuing orders for firefighting and damage control, continued commanding even as his life bled away. Miller could do nothing more for the captain. Bennion was dying, they all knew it, and there were no medical interventions available that could save him. So, Miller did what he could. He stayed close, ready to help, ready to do whatever was needed. That's when he saw the unmanned .50 caliber Browning anti-aircraft machine gun on the port side of the bridge. .50 caliber Browning M2 machine gun was a fearsome weapon, capable of firing 450 to 550 rounds per minute, each projectile weighing half an ounce and traveling at 2,900 feet per second. It was designed to shoot down aircraft, to punch through engine blocks, to deliver devastating firepower against targets that standard infantry weapons couldn't touch. It was also a weapon Doris Miller had never been trained to operate. The Navy's regulations were clear. Black sailors were not to receive combat training. They were not to operate weapons systems, were mess attendants, not warriors. Their role was to serve, not to fight. But regulations don't mean much when Japanese bombers are trying to kill you. Miller looked at the gun. He looked at the sky filled with enemy aircraft. He made a decision that would echo through history. He grabbed the gun's handles and opened fire. Later, when asked how he knew what to do, Miller would give a response that was both modest and matter of fact. It wasn't hard. I just pulled the trigger and she worked fine. I had watched the others with these guns. Those few weeks he had spent at the secondary battery gunnery school aboard the USS Nevada back in July 1940. That brief exposure to weapons systems, opportunity to watch and learn even if he wasn't officially trained, had given him enough understanding to know which end pointed at the enemy and how to make it fire. But knowledge and skill are different things. Operating a .50 caliber machine gun under combat conditions requires more than just pulling the trigger. You need to lead moving targets for your own platform's movement, manage the weapon's recoil, clear jams, reload under pressure. Miller did all of it. He swung the gun toward a Japanese dive bomber, coming in low over the harbor, squeezed the trigger, and watched the tracer rounds arc up toward the plane. The Browning roared, familiar sound of American defiance against the surprise attack. Empty shell. Casings clattered onto the deck around his feet. The gun bucked in his hands with each burst. His boxer's strength and his work-hardened arms held it steady. Ensign Victor Delano, checking anti-aircraft positions on the ship, climbed to the bridge and was astonished to find Miller firing the gun. In his later combat report, Delano noted that Miller was blazing away as though he had fired one all his life. How many planes did Doris Miller shoot down? The official Navy record credits him with 1 confirmed kill. Miller himself later claimed he shot down between 4 and 6 aircraft, and other eyewitnesses supported higher numbers. The confusion is understandable in the chaos of battle, with multiple guns firing, with planes exploding and crashing into the harbor. Precise accounting was impossible. What's certain is that Miller manned that gun and fired at attacking aircraft until he exhausted his ammunition supply. He fired through multiple strafing runs, while the ship shook with bomb impacts. He fired while fire raged around the bridge, and the USS Arizona exploded with such force that the blast wave could be felt across the entire harbor. He fired until there was nothing left to fire. At approximately 9:30 a.m., the order came down from the surviving senior officers: abandon ship. The USS West Virginia was settling into the shallow harbor bottom, her list increasing, fires out of control, further resistance impossible. If the crew didn't evacuate immediately, would go down with the ship. Miller helped evacuate additional wounded sailors, before finally leaving the bridge himself. He descended from the superstructure, crossed the tilting, strewn deck, and went over the side into the oil-slicked, body-filled water of Pearl Harbor. He swam. Many sailors couldn't. They had never learned, or they were too badly injured, or the shock of what they had witnessed paralyzed them. Miller, strong and determined, swam through the horror, through burning oil, through floating debris, through the bodies of shipmates. He reached safety. Behind him, the USS West Virginia settled onto the harbor bottom in shallow water, prevented from capsizing only by the crew's heroic counter-flooding efforts. Of the approximately 2,000 men aboard that morning, 132 were dead and 52 were wounded. Captain Mervyn Bennion died on the bridge, still at his post, refusing to leave his ship even as his life slipped away. He would be posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his leadership and courage under fire. Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor lasted approximately 2 hours. When it was over, 243 Americans were dead, 178 were wounded, 8 battleships were damaged or destroyed. The United States was at war. Among the survivors was Mess Attendant Second Class Doris Miller, who had started that morning collecting laundry and ended it as an American hero. December 13, 1941, 6 days after the attack, Doris Miller reported to his new assignment, the heavy cruiser USS Indianapolis. His previous ship, the USS West Virginia, was a total loss, sunk in shallow water. Her resurrection months or years away. The Navy needed sailors on operational vessels, so Miller and the other West Virginia survivors were reassigned throughout the fleet. For Miller, It was back to familiar duties. Back to the mess halls. Back to serving food and cleaning quarters. Back to being invisible except when officers needed something. But something had changed. Story of the mess attendant who had manned a machine gun during the Pearl Harbor attack was spreading through the fleet. Sailors talked about it in hushed, reverent tones. Officers nodded approvingly. Even in the midst of shock and grief, and the frantic preparations for war, people recognized that something extraordinary had happened. The Navy, however, quick to publicly acknowledge it. On January 1, 1942, 3 weeks and a day after Pearl Harbor, the Navy released a list of commendations for actions on December 7. Among the names of white sailors being recognized for heroism was a single line about an unnamed Negro mess attendant. That was it. No name. No details. Just an acknowledgement that somewhere in the chaos of Pearl Harbor, a black sailor had done something worthy of mention. To the Navy's leadership in early 1942 was a profound discomfort with the idea of highlighting a black hero. The service was segregated by regulation and by tradition. Black sailors were second-class citizens in uniform, limited to the most menial roles, excluded from the brotherhood of warriors. Promoting one of them as a hero would raise uncomfortable questions about why they weren't allowed to serve in combat roles in the first place. It would suggest, disturbingly to some, black men were capable of courage equal to white men. It would challenge the fundamental assumptions upon which the Navy's racial hierarchy was built. So the Navy chose anonymity. An unnamed Negro mess attendant could be celebrated without threatening the established order. He could be a feel-good story without becoming a symbol of change. Underestimated the power of the black press and the determination of the civil rights organizations. National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, had been fighting for equal treatment of black service members since World War I, knew that military service could be a powerful argument for civil rights. How could America deny full citizenship to men who were willing to die for their country? When the NAACP heard about the unnamed Negro mess attendant, they immediately began pressuring the Navy to reveal his identity. If this sailor had been brave enough to fight for America, America should know his name. Lawrence Reddick, director of the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in Harlem, wrote directly to the Navy Department, requesting that the sailor's name be released so it could be added to the center's honor roll of race relations. Reddick suspected, correctly, that the anonymity was intentional. The Navy was deliberately hiding the hero's identity to avoid giving ammunition to those pushing for integration. The Pittsburgh Courier, one of the most influential black newspapers in America, took up the cause with the fervor of a crusade. They published articles demanding the Navy reveal the hero's name. They wrote editorials about the injustice of anonymity, mobilized their readers to flood the Navy with letters and telegrams demanding recognition. Under this mounting pressure, the Navy finally relented. On March 12, 1942, more than 3 months after Pearl Harbor, they officially identified the hero as Mess Attendant Second Class Doris Miller of Waco, Texas. The Pittsburgh Courier broke the story on March 14. Suddenly Doris Miller's name was everywhere. Black newspapers across the country ran front-page stories about him. His photograph appeared in publications nationwide. A young, handsome, powerfully built man in his Navy uniform, the embodiment of quiet strength and dignity. But recognition was not the same as honor. The Navy had identified him, but had not yet formally recognized his actions with a medal. That would require additional pressure, additional fighting, additional months of waiting. Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox was in a difficult position. Knox, who had opposed black sailors serving in any combat role, now faced overwhelming public pressure to award Miller a high decoration. The Medal of Honor was being discussed. Senator James Meade of New York introduced a bill specifically to give Miller the Medal of Honor. Congressman John Lisinski of Michigan did the same in the House. Knox refused. His recommendation, the Navy Cross, the Navy's second highest decoration for valor, but not the Medal of Honor. Why? No official reason was ever given, but historians have noted a disturbing pattern. Not a single black service member received the Medal of Honor during World War II, despite numerous acts of extraordinary valor. The institutional resistance to recognizing black heroism at the highest level was insurmountable. It wasn't until 1997, more than 50 years after the war ended, that President Clinton finally awarded Medals of Honor to 7 Black World War II veterans, all posthumously. On April 1, 1942, Secretary Knox issued the official citation for Miller's Navy Cross for distinguished devotion to duty, extraordinary courage and disregard for his own personal safety during the attack on the fleet in Pearl Harbor, territory of Hawaii, by Japanese forces on December 7, 1941. While at the side of his captain on the bridge, Miller, despite enemy strafing and bombing, and in the face of a serious fire, assisted in moving his captain, who had been mortally wounded, a place of greater safety, and later manned and operated a machine gun directed at enemy Japanese attacking aircraft until ordered to leave the bridge. It was formal, bureaucratic language that barely captured the reality of what Miller had done. But it was official recognition, and it would have to be enough. The ceremony to present the medal took place on May 27, 1942, aboard the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise at Pearl Harbor. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, personally pinned the Navy Cross on Miller's chest. Nimitz said, "This marks the first time in this conflict that such high tribute has been made in the Pacific Fleet to a member of his race, and I'm sure that the future will see others similarly honored for brave acts." The ceremony was photographed and filmed. Images of the White Admiral decorating the black sailor appeared in newspapers around the world. For many Americans, it was the first time they had seen a black man recognized for military heroism on the same platform as white heroes. Doris Miller became the first African American to receive the Navy Cross. It was a historic moment, a crack in the wall of segregation, a small but significant victory in the long struggle for equal recognition. But for Miller himself, the attention was uncomfortable, even troubling. June 1, 1942. Miller was promoted to mess attendant first class. The promotion came with slightly better pay and more responsibility, but it was still the same role, the same limitations. The Navy had decorated him for combat heroism, but refused to train him for combat duty. The contradiction was not lost on Miller. In one of the few letters he wrote to the Pittsburgh Courier, which continued to champion his cause, Miller expressed cautious optimism. "You have opened up a little for us, at least for the ones who were following me, and I hope it will be better in the future." But privately, Miller struggled with his newfound fame. His brother later recounted Miller's words after receiving the Navy Cross. "My life is a holy hell. The white folks never did like me because I'm colored. The colored guys aboard ship do not like me because they say I think I'm somebody special." It was the impossible position of the token hero, celebrated by some, resented by others, unable to simply be a sailor doing his job because he had become a symbol in a cultural war he hadn't asked to fight. In November 1942, Navy decided to leverage Miller's fame for recruitment purposes. He was ordered back to Pearl Harbor and then detached from the USS Indianapolis for a war bond tour. For the first time in the war, a black sailor would be allowed on the speaking tour alongside white war heroes. From December 1942 through January 1943, Miller traveled across America, speaking at rallies, posing for photographs, selling war bonds, encouraging young black men to enlist despite the discriminatory treatment they would face. He appeared in Oakland, California. He visited his hometown of Waco, where thousands turned out to see their local hero. He spoke in Dallas, and he addressed the first graduating class of black sailors from the Great Lakes Naval Training Station. Young men who were entering a navy that was slowly, grudgingly, beginning to change because of what Doris Miller had done. In 1943, the Navy featured Miller on a recruiting poster designed by David Stone Martin. The poster showed Miller in his uniform, wearing his Navy cross with the caption, "Above and beyond the call of duty." It became one of the most famous recruiting images of the war, appearing in black neighborhoods across the nation. Poster worked. Black enlistment surged. Young men saw Doris Miller and thought, if he can be a hero, maybe I can too. They signed up, hundreds, and then thousands of them, joining a navy that still wouldn't let them fight, but that had at least proven that black courage existed and could be recognized. But the war bond tour was exhausting for Miller. He was not a natural public speaker. He didn't enjoy the spotlight. He wanted to return to service, to do his duty, to be a sailor rather than a symbol. And he wanted something else. Something he would never say publicly, but that ate at him privately. He wanted to serve in a combat role. He wanted to be trained as a gunner, those anti-aircraft weapons, officially rather than in the desperate improvisation of battle. He wanted to be treated as a warrior, not just a mess attendant who had happened to fight back when attacked. The Navy granted the first wish but not the second. In February 1943, changed the title, Mess Attendant, to Steward's Mate. It was a cosmetic change, rebranding segregation without actually ending it. The role remained the same. In May 1943, Miller was transferred to the Puget Sound Navy Yard at Bremerton, Washington, where he was assigned to a newly constructed escort carrier, the USS Liscome Bay, CVE 56D. On June 1, 1943, Miller was promoted again, this time to cook third class. More responsibility, better pay, still limited to the mess and galley, still serving rather than fighting. Liscome Bay was a Casablanca class escort carrier, smaller and less capable than the fleet carriers, but essential for protecting convoys, providing air support for amphibious operations, ferrying aircraft. She had a crew of 960 men, and Miller joined them as one of the ship's cooks, preparing meals, maintaining galley equipment, doing the work he had been doing since 1939. In October 1943, the Liscome Bay departed for Pearl Harbor for training exercises. In November, she left Pearl Harbor to join the Northern Task Force for Operation Galvanic, the assault on the Gilbert Islands, specifically Makin and Tarawa atolls. Miller was heading back to war. But this time, as November approached, he reportedly told people close to him that he felt this deployment would be a suicide expedition. He had a premonition, a sense of doom, the feeling that his luck had run out. He was right. November 24, 1943, 5:10 a.m., 20 miles southwest of Butaratari Island, Gilbert Islands, the USS Liscome Bay was part of Task Group 52.3, providing air support for Army units fighting to capture Makin Atoll. The operation had been successful. Makin was now in American hands, and the carrier's crew was looking forward to Thanksgiving. Before November 23, the ship's cooks had broken out frozen turkeys from Pearl Harbor, preparing for a holiday feast. The war had been good to them recently. Gilbert Island's operation was going well. Men were talking about shore leave, about what they'd do when they got back to Pearl Harbor. Doris Miller, now 24 years old, had been serving aboard the Liscome Bay for 6 months. He had settled into the routine, found his place among the crew, earned respect through his work ethic and his quiet competence. The war-bond tour seemed like a lifetime ago. The fame had faded. He was just a cook again, just a sailor, just another man doing his job in a war that was slowly grinding toward Allied victory. 5:10 a.m., a single torpedo from the Japanese submarine I-175 struck the USS Liscome Bay near the stern. The torpedo hit was bad. The explosion that followed was catastrophic. Liscome Bay was an escort carrier, which meant she carried aircraft, which meant she carried aviation fuel, which meant she carried aircraft bombs and ammunition. When the torpedo struck, it didn't just breach the hull, it set off a chain reaction. The aircraft bomb magazine detonated moments after the torpedo impact. The explosion was massive, so powerful that it could be felt by ships miles away. The entire stern section of the carrier was blown apart. Fire and debris shot hundreds of feet into the air. The ship's structure buckled and broke. Rear Admiral Henry M. Bennion, who was aboard as commander of Carrier Division 24, died instantly. Captain Irving D. Wiltse, the ship's commanding officer, was killed. Hundreds of sailors were killed in the initial explosion, or trapped in rapidly flooding compartments as the ship began to sink. The USS Liscome Bay went down in 23 minutes. 3 minutes from torpedo impact to the ship disappearing beneath the waves. Most warships in World War II, even when fatally damaged, took hours to sink, giving crews time to abandon ship to launch rescue operations. The Liscome Bay's crew had less than half an hour. In those 23 minutes, sailors fought fires, freed trapped shipmates, launched lifeboats, jumped into the water, everything they could to survive. But the speed of the sinking, the violence of the explosions, the confusion and panic made organized evacuation almost impossible. 960 men aboard the USS Liscome Bay, only 272 survived. A staggering 646 sailors died, making it the deadliest sinking of an aircraft carrier in United States Navy history. Among the dead was cook third-class Doris Miller. How he died, no one knows. Whether he was killed in the initial explosion, trapped below decks as the ship flooded, or swept away in the churning water as the carrier went down, history does not record. His body was never recovered. Like hundreds of his shipmates, he simply vanished into the Pacific, claimed by the same ocean that had witnessed his moment of greatest heroism 2 years earlier. Miller was officially listed as missing in action on November 24, 1943. A year and a day later, on November 25, 1944, he was officially presumed dead. His family received the notification on December 7, 1944, exactly 3 years after Pearl Harbor, that had made him famous, and that now marked his death. Henrietta Miller, his mother, held a memorial service in Waco. The town mourned. The newspapers that had celebrated him now eulogized him. But for many people, the news was simply another entry in the endless list of casualties. Another Gold Star family. Another young man who would never come home. Doris Miller was 24 years old when he died. He had served in the Navy for 4 years and 2 months. He had been decorated for extraordinary heroism. He had become a symbol of Black achievement and a rallying point for integration. He had helped change the Navy and, in some small way, had helped change America. And then he was gone. Swallowed by the war that had made him a hero, and that demanded more sacrifice than generations should be asked to give. The death of Doris Miller could have been the end of his story. Thousands of American servicemen died in World War II. Most of them forgotten except by their families and the communities they left behind. Miller's legacy proved more durable than his mortal life. In 1945, poet Gwendolyn Brooks published Negro Hero, a powerful poem narrated from Miller's perspective, capturing the contradiction of being asked to fight for a country that denied you full citizenship. I had to kick their law into their teeth in order to save them. However, I have heard that sometimes you have to deal devilishly with drowning men in order to swim them to shore, will haul themselves, and you to the trash and the fish beneath. The poem became one of Brooks' most celebrated works, ensuring that Miller's story would be taught in schools, discussed in literature classes, remembered as part of the African American experience of World War II. In 1947, the Dorie Miller Foundation was established, beginning an annual award to individuals or groups considered outstanding in the field of race relations. Recipients over the years would include Jackie Robinson, Jesse Owens, Eleanor Roosevelt, a testament to how Miller's sacrifice had become linked to the broader struggle for civil rights. The military integration that Miller's heroism had helped spark continued to accelerate. In 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981, officially desegregating the United States Armed Forces. The order cited equality of treatment, an opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin. While full implementation would take years, the principle was established. Courage and capability knew no color line. Many historians credit Miller's Pearl Harbor actions as one of the catalysts for this change. His story made it impossible to argue that black men couldn't fight bravely for America. His Navy Cross made it impossible to claim that black service members couldn't earn the highest decorations, made it impossible to deny that black sailors paid the same ultimate price as white sailors. In 1973, 30 years after Miller's death, the Navy commissioned the USS Miller, RFF 1291, Knox, class frigate named in his honor. It was only the fourth U.S. Navy vessel named after an African American. The Miller served in the Atlantic Fleet until it was decommissioned in 1991, continuing Miller's legacy of service for nearly 2 decades. In 1991, the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority organized the dedication of a bronze commemorative plaque at Doris Miller Park, a housing community near Naval Station Pearl Harbor. The ceremony took place on October 12, what would have been Miller's 72nd birthday. In 2002, scholar Malafi Kitasante included Miller on his list of 100 greatest African Americans, recognizing him not just as a military hero, but as a significant figure in African American history and the civil rights movement. In 2010, the United States Postal Service honored Miller with a 44-cent commemorative stamp as part of a series celebrating distinguished sailors. The stamp featured his official Navy photograph, ensuring that millions of Americans would see his face and learn his name. In 2014, the Department of Veterans Affairs renamed the VA Medical Center in Waco, Texas, Doris Miller VA Medical Center, a fitting tribute in his hometown, where the boy who once helped his mother with laundry grew into a man who changed history. In 2017, on the 76th anniversary of the Pearl Harbor attack, a 9-foot bronze statue of Miller was unveiled on the banks of the Brazos River in Waco. The statue shows him at the anti-aircraft gun, jaw set in determination, hands gripping the weapon, eyes fixed on an unseen enemy. It stands as a permanent reminder of what courage looks like. And then, in 2020, perhaps the greatest honor of all, January 20, 2020, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Acting Secretary of the Navy Thomas B. Modly stood before a gathering that included Miller's surviving family members and announced that the Navy's newest aircraft carrier would be named the USS Doris Miller, CVN 81. It was a historic decision on multiple levels. The carrier would be the first in U.S. history, named after an African American. It would be the first carrier named after an enlisted sailor, rather than an officer or political leader. It would be a Gerald R. Ford class supercarrier, the most advanced, most powerful warship ever constructed, with a displacement of 100,000 tons, a crew of 600, and the capability to project American power anywhere in the world. Modley's words at the announcement ceremony captured why Miller's story still mattered nearly 80 years after Pearl Harbor. As we celebrate the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., we recognize that for too many of these warriors the liberty they defended overseas was denied to them and their families here at home simply because of the color of their skin. Miller's story parallels the civil rights story. His story, and the stories of too many others, deserves to be remembered and deserve to be taught. Miller's story should inspire us all that, in America, anything is possible. The USS Doris Miller is currently scheduled to be laid down in 2026, launched in 2029, and commissioned in 2030. When she joins the fleet, she will be the most powerful warship on Earth, capable of launching 75 aircraft, projecting power across 1,000 miles, serving as the centerpiece of a carrier battle group that represents American strength and resolve. She will bear the name of a man who started his Navy career as a mess attendant, who was told by his nation that he was fit only to serve food and shine shoes, who proved on one terrible morning that courage and heroism know no racial boundaries. The ultimate price for a country that had not yet learned to fully recognize his humanity. The irony is profound and purposeful. That once limited Miller to menial service now builds him a ship that embodies everything he was denied in life: power, respect, recognition, the right to fight as a warrior rather than serve as a steward. But it's more than irony. It's acknowledgement. It's apology. It's a promise that the nation will remember what he did and what it cost him and his generation. The story they tell goes beyond just the 15 minutes of combat at Pearl Harbor. It encompasses the larger truth Miller embodied, that heroism is not about permission or authority or official recognition. It's about seeing what needs to be done and doing it, regardless of the rules that say you shouldn't or the people who say you can't. Miller didn't ask for permission to man that gun. He didn't wait for orders. He didn't worry about whether he was allowed. He saw enemy aircraft trying to kill his shipmates and his country, and he fought back with everything he had. In those 15 minutes, he challenged a century of assumptions about race and capability. He demonstrated that courage is a human quality, not a white quality. He proved that when the shooting starts, what matters is not the color of your skin, but the content of your character and your willingness to put yourself on the line for others. The Navy eventually learned that lesson. The broader American military learned it. And in time, slowly and imperfectly, American society learned it too. The direct line from Doris Miller manning a machine gun on December 7, 1941, Harry Truman desegregating the armed forces in 1948, to the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s is not straight, but it's real. Miller didn't single-handedly integrate the military or end racial discrimination. No one person could. But he was a catalyst, a symbol, a proof that the old justifications for segregation were lies. In being that symbol, he helped create the change that would follow. The tragedy is that Doris Miller himself didn't live to see the fruits of what he had planted. He died at 24. His potential unfulfilled, his future stolen by a war that consumed an entire generation. We'll never know what he might have accomplished in peacetime. We'll never know if he would have become a leader in the civil rights movement or simply gone home to Texas to live a quiet life. or done anything at all beyond what he had already done. What we know is that on one Sunday morning, a cook became a warrior. A mess attendant became a hero. A young black man from Texas became a symbol of American courage, and the catalyst for change that would take decades to fully realize. We know that his name is Doris Miller. It deserves to be remembered not just as a footnote in the story of Pearl Harbor, but as a central figure in the story of what America can be when it lives up to its ideals. In 2030, when the USS Doris Miller is commissioned and begins her service, she will carry his name and his legacy across the world's oceans. She will be a reminder that heroes can come from unexpected places, courage knows no color, and that even a humble mess attendant can change the course of history. The morning of December 7, 1941, Doris Miller collected laundry in the bowels of a battleship. By evening, he had saved wounded sailors, manned an anti-aircraft gun against impossible odds, and proven that an American hero can look like anyone. That transformation, from cook to warrior, from invisible to immortal, is the story that needs to be told and retold. Taught and remembered, honored and celebrated. Because if we forget Doris Miller, we forget something essential about ourselves. We forget that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. We forget that heroism isn't granted by those in power. It's seized by those who refuse to accept limitations. We forget that the fight for recognition and equality has been waged not just in courts and legislatures, but on battlefields and bridges and in the hearts of individuals who simply did what was right, regardless of the cost. If this story moved you, if it made you remember a name that time tried to erase, if it reminded you that heroes come in all colors and from all backgrounds, if it made you think about the countless other Doris Millers whose stories have been forgotten or never told, then share it. Tell others. Keep the memory alive. Because Doris Miller, attendant second class, Navy Cross recipient, heavyweight boxing champion, son of Texas, American hero, deserves more than a page in a history book. He deserves to be remembered. He deserves to have his story told. He deserves the recognition that was denied him in life, but that history is finally, belatedly granting him in death. On December 7, 1941, the world changed. One of the men who changed, it was a cook who became a hero under fire. A young black sailor named Doris Miller, who proved that courage has no color and that heroism needs no permission.